Well, thank you, James, for the introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and honour to be here tonight at my first gathering of the world's premier Burns Club with its long and distinguished history, which I've been hearing about tonight. As James mentioned, I was recently appointed to this joke title, Professor of Romanticism, at Queen Mary University of London. Having previously spent 20 years at the University of Aberdeen. And again, as James mentioned, I'm a half Scot by birth with a decidedly English accent, as you can hear, which I'm afraid didn't alter a jot during my 2 decades in Scotland. But everything else about me changed, and it will be a long time before I stop feeling that Scotland is my home. I was brought up in Nottingham, but my father, a cardiologist, was from Ayrshire, and his father was from Irvine, though he ended up teaching classics at Glasgow High School. And in his later years, my grandfather wrote an as yet unpublished novel called The Flicker of the Smithy Fire, which told me rather more than I wanted to know about my ancestors in Irvine. And whiskey looms large, and the novel contains the memorable line, "And nither drop the edge of the precipice." So it's in that mode, some of it. But the central character, modelled on my great-grandfather, who I never met, has one very appealing characteristic, namely that he is a lover of the poetry of Burns, of course a local poet for him, and he seems to have shared some of Burns's mercurial personality, wildly enthusiastic at certain moments, but profoundly melancholic at others. And my father inherited this love of Burns and this emotional profile, and so did I, which is why I was so pleased to be asked to give this immortal memory address tonight. Now, the more I've studied Romantic poetry, and I've done little else in my career, the more I've realised that what was really driving the remarkable flowering of lyric poetry in the Romantic period was the revival of song. And the towering genius in that revival was Burns, who was, of course, as great a songwriter as he was a poet. And perhaps the only other writer of whom this could be said is Shakespeare. Burns mastered both sets of skills, and his best songs are as unforgettable as his best poems, none more so than the song that I want to talk tonight, a song which is actually about not forgetting, Auld Lang Syne. It's a song, of course, that every Scots knows, or half knows, that's sung at the end of every year, of every ceilidh, of every Burns supper. But the curious thing is, as some of you will know, many of you will know, but most people at large don't know, is that Auld Lang Syne is not by Burns. It's a traditional song that Burns rediscovered or discovered and rewrote. And now, although Burns wrote many original songs, and you've heard a couple of them tonight, his songwriting skills were exercised on this occasion in recognising the power of an existing song and in making it even more powerful by rewriting it, adapting it in a new way. Burns was very willing to admit his debt to tradition, and in fact he was a great expert on the tradition of Scots song. After the sensational success of his first poetry collection, poems chiefly in the Scottish dialect, in 1786, Burns spent much of the next 10 years, his final years, alas, working on 2 big song collections. The Scots Musical Museum, a collaboration with the Edinburgh publisher James Johnson, and George Thompson's Select Collection of Original Scottish Airs, another Edinburgh publication. And between these 2 collections, Burns contributed some 300 songs. Some of them he wrote himself, but many were existing songs that he transcribed or, in some cases, rewrote. And when the songs were published in these collections, he used a code to indicate which was which. So unaltered traditional songs were left unsigned. Songs marked R, B, and X were his own. Those were his own signature. And those marked Z were old verses with corrections or additions. That's what the key tells us. Now, Auld Lang Syne, published in 1796 in the Scots Musical Museum, was marked Z, denoting a traditional song that Burns has amended. Elsewhere, in a letter to the publisher Thomson, he is more specific about its provenance, claiming that the song, as he said, had never been in print, nor even in manuscript, until I took it down from an old man singing. Now this, as we will see, is not strictly true, because the song had been in print and in manuscript before, though Burns may also have written down a version that he heard in live performance. But what's interesting here is how he downplays his own creative input in adapting and transforming this song. He is content for Auld Lang Syne to be identified as a traditional song with slight amendments. In other words, Scottish tradition is more important to him than his own authorial ego, which cannot be said of all romantic poets' egos. And Byron, I'm thinking of you, but happy birthday tomorrow to another great Scots bard. It's Byron's birthday tomorrow, and we should have another party tomorrow night. Another letter Burns wrote in 1788 reveals more precisely why Burns felt so captivated by this particular song. He writes to his friend Mrs. Dunlop, "Is not the Scots phrase Auld Lang Syne exceedingly expressive? There is an old song and tune which has often thrilled through my soul. Light lie the turf on the breast of the dream-inspired poet who composed this glorious fragment. There's more of the fire of native genius in it than half a dozen of modern English bacchanalians." Well, that's a wonderful tribute to the Scots song tradition, to the anonymous author, heaven dream-inspired poet whose song he reworked, and also to the composer who devised the original tune. And that comment is also a wonderful tribute to the Scots language, as he singles out that phrase, Auld Lang Syne, which means roughly old long since or old long ago. And interestingly, it's something of a tautology, because long ago is by definition old, so that the adjective old functions there as what a linguist would call an intensifier, increasing the sense of pastness, so making old older, if you like, which is what makes that phrase so resonant, so poetic, and Burns had the sort of linguistic instinct to recognize that. Now, when I started exploring the history of this song, the relationship between Burns and tradition became even more fascinating, because in fact, this song has a very long history, and it underwent many other transformations before Burns got hold of it at the end of the 18th century. And the earliest printed form of it that survives is a broadside ballad from 1701 called an excellent and proper new ballad entitled Auld Lang Syne. And there's a copy of it in the National Library of Scotland. I think it's just one of two copies that survives. Now this version, this broadside ballad version, starts with the very same line, "Should old acquaintance be forgot?" But in other respects, it differs greatly from Burns's version. It's double the length. It's divided into two sections. It's written, for the most part, in English rather than Scots, apart from the chorus, and the title, as you heard me say, is Auld Lang Syne, not Auld Lang Syne. And crucially, it's a love poem. It's about the pain of separation and the greater pain of rejection or imagined rejection by a lover. So the story behind the song is that there are two lovers, and one is named Clorinda, a name that Burns would famously use in another context, but not in his version of this song. And none of my academic colleagues seem to have picked up on this. Shame on them. But there it is, Clorinda. Now, these two lovers have been separated from one another, and they are living apart. They're thinking of one another, and they're vowing eternal fidelity to one another, cursing one another at times as well, but they're separated. But each of them, while vowing never to forget the other, is fearful that they have been or that they will be forgotten. So what you have in the song, in each of the verses, is a new stage in the lovers' confused emotions as they agonize over the thought that they may have been forgotten or, worse still, replaced in the affections of the other. So the song moves across the whole spectrum of emotion, from sadness to despair to recrimination, and then, finally a kind of resignation. So it's an incredibly moving song, a tragic love lament. And it's all the more so because the two lovers, although they're separated and speaking or singing separately, they're feeling more or less exactly the same. They're going through the same torment, which is left unresolved at the end, with the lovers still separated, each reflecting privately on their plight. So that's the story of this song. And in this version of the song, the opening line, should old acquaintance be forgot, it carries a meaning almost opposite to the one that it has in Burns. Because the whole point here is that an old friendship has been forgotten, or that so the lovers fear. But in fact, they're remembered by one another, but they never find that out. And this tragic irony and the parallelism of their lament are what give poignancy to this song. Now, this version of Auld Lang Syne has probably not been sung for 200 years. But as a special treat, we're going to hear it tonight, because our two fabulous singers, Isla and George, have agreed to perform it for us to the accompaniment of my bonny daughter on piano. Now, there's not time to listen to all 12 verses of this, but I've cherry-picked 5 of them, and 2 in each voice, and then a 5th in unison. And there's a little bit of creative license here, because in the song, the lovers, as I said, they're not reunited, so there is no unison moment in the ballad as it was transmitted to us from 1701. But it makes the point, having the two singers together in the final verse, makes the point that they are having the same feelings in parallel. And if you listen carefully to the words, you'll see that although Isla's part is more or less in the same emotional register throughout, George has a moment of happiness as he reflects fondly on his happy memories before sinking into despair again at the end. So listen out for the fluctuations of mood in this song, because that's part of the magic of it.
I hear somebody singing. forgot and never thought upon. The flames of love extinguished, fully past and gone. Is thy sweetheart now grown so cold, that loving breast of thine, that thou canst never once reflect on Auld Lang Syne, on Auld Lang Syne, my Joe, on Auld Lang Syne, that thou canst never once reflect on Auld Lang Syne.
Where are thy protestations, thy vows and oaths, my dear? Thou made to me, and I to thee, in register yet clear. Is faith and truth so violate to immortal gods divine, as never once for to reflect on Auld Lang Syne, on Auld Lang Syne, my Joe, on Auld Lang Syne, that thou canst never once reflect on Auld Lang Syne.
My heart is ravished with delight when thee I think upon. All grief and sorrow takes the flight, and speedily is gone. The bright remembrance of thy face so fills this heart of mine, that foils no fate can be displeased for Auld Lang Syne.
Is Cupid's fears or frosty cares that makes thy spirits decay? Or is't an object of more worth has stolen my heart away? Or some desert makes thee neglect her so much once was thine, that thou canst never once reflect on Auld Lang Syne? Dear, will ye give it back, my heart, since I cannot have thine?
For since with yours ye will not part,
No reason you have mine,
and yet I think I'll let it lie within that breast of thine. Who hath a thief in every eye to make me live in pain? For Auld Lang Syne, my Joe, for Auld Lang Syne, wilt thou not ever once reflect on Auld Lang
Syne.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's a dream come true for me to hear that beautiful song restored. I mean, restored to all of us after all this time. And that last verse is my favourite. That urgent plea, dear, will you give it back, my heart, since I cannot have thine. And then the contradiction, but yeah, I think I'll let it lie within that breast of thine. The realization that the heart is irrevocably lost. I mean, that contradiction is the true voice of love. Now, I said that the 1701 broadside was the first printed version that survives, but an earlier manuscript version has recently come to light in a nobleman's commonplace book from the 1660s. It's the so-called Friendrocht manuscript, which originated in Aberdeenshire. Does anyone know Friendrocht? Yeah, you do. But, oh, well, well, we must. Yeah, well, it's, there's a famous ballad about Friendrocht, but it also, this very important collection of songs originated from there. Now, this even earlier version, still in manuscript, has never been published, but it was put on display a few years ago in an exhibition in New York at the Pierpont Morgan Library. And it's quite similar to the version that we've just heard, but it contains several verses which are not found in the later printed versions. And I'm waiting for it to come into the public domain. Now, I've seen the whole thing, and I've done a sort of secret transcription of it when the librarian wasn't looking in New York. And if anything, this version is even more poignant. I didn't want to ask the singers to do it tonight because you'd all be weeping into your glasses. And, now, in one very striking verse, the male lover says, "If fortune thus had favoured me as to have made thee mine, I'd think it no disparagement to have been John Tamson's man." Has anyone heard that phrase? John Tamson's man.
John Thompson's
Beards.
Well, John Tamson's man, tell me about that phrase, but John Tamson's man is an idiomatic expression that means a henpecked husband. So he's saying, I mean, it sort of gives a little new inflection to it, but he's saying, I'm so desperate to be with you, you can treat me how you like. And again, that's the true voice of love, of abject, unconditional love. I'm afraid so. Yeah. We've all been there. Now, there's also a verse, a lovely verse, where the male lover tries to face up to the fact that his beloved no longer loves him. And it tries to make himself take his leave once and for all. And it goes like this. "Though Cupid's dart was shot at thee, it did not wound thy heart. Farewell, adieu, I must be gone. It's time to depart. For thou hast most inconstant been, which makes me to repine. As well as thou, I'll bid adieu to Auld Lang Syne." Now, the power of this verse lies, I think, in those repeated goodbyes, those different ways of saying exactly the same thing. Farewell, adieu, I must be gone. As he tries to make himself do something that his feelings won't allow him to do, namely to let her go, to let the past go, to bid adieu not just to her but to Auld Lang Syne itself. And clearly he cannot do it. Now, between the printed version that you heard and Burns's version at the end of the 18th century, there were many other adaptations of this song, including a version by Allan Ramsay entitled "The Kind Reception," which starts with the same line, but completely inverts the original sentiments of the song by turning it instead into a celebration of a hero's return from war into the arms of his faithful lover. Now, this song is delivered wholly in the voice of the female lover, and I've asked Isla to sing a couple of verses of it to give you a flavour of it, a very different flavour to what we've just heard.
Should old acquaintance be forgot, though they return with scars, these are the noble heroes' lot, obtained in glorious wars. Welcome, my Vara, to my breast, thy arms about me twine, and make me once again as blessed as I was lang syne. O'er muir and dale with your gay friend, you may pursue the chase, and after a blithe bottle end, all cares in my embrace. And in a vacant rainy day, you shall be wholly mine. We'll make the hours run smooth away, and laugh at lang syne.
Well, yes, very different mood, as you see. They're laughing at Auld Lang Syne. But notice that this tragic lament in Ramsay's version is halfway to being a drinking song, the mention of the bottle end there, and also a rather racy love-making song. You know, make the hours run smooth away as your holy mine. But it does end respectably enough with the lovers going to the altar. Now, despite what he says to his publisher, Burns is likely to have known several printed versions of Auld Lang Syne. He knew all the collections, including Allan Ramsay's version, and he doubtless heard many oral performances. Now, since we don't have a record of the oral performances, we can't be exactly certain what Burns kept and what he changed, what he invented himself. But the evidence suggests that in his own version of the song, he mixed elements from a number of other versions, abridging or deleting some sections, extending or replacing others, and making a series of clever adjustments and additions which greatly enhanced the expressive power of the song. He follows Allan Ramsay in making it about reunion rather than separation, but a reunion now of old friends rather than lovers. Ramsay's kind reception becomes in Burns a scene of exuberant male camaraderie. It's now a full-blown drinking song, which includes such memorable lines as the ones where Burns bids us to shake hands and take a right good willy wacht for Auld Lang Syne. Crucially too, Burns has transposed the song from English into Scots, and he exploits the expressive resources of Scots with great linguistic skill. Who could resist the quirky inventiveness and the alliteration of that phrase, a right good willy wacht, meaning a really good swig, and it doesn't sound so good in English. With a phrase like that, no wonder people have been raising their glasses ever since. With his amazing gift for capturing the full range of human emotion, Burns manages to retain, I think, the pathos of the original love song, but he converts the lover's bittersweet reflections into poignant nostalgia for childhood friendship, which encompasses the sense both of lost time and of lost place. And in a few simple words, Burns invokes in his song an entire shared world, rooted in a specific landscape and remembered all the more fondly for the intervening years of separation. Now, you'll have a chance to sing the song yourselves later, I think, at the end of the ceilidh, and to dance it, of course. But let's hear Isla and George sing 2 verses from Burns's version, again to the old tune, and let's really listen to the words. Let's listen to their poetic force.
With Koshka.
With Koshka playing, yes.
We toil on about the braes and put the gowans fine, but we've wandered mony a weary fit sin Auld Lang Syne. For Auld Lang Syne, my Jew, for Auld Lang Syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for Auld Lang Syne. We twilighted in the burn frae morning sun till dine, but seas atween us Brady Road sen Auld Lang Syne. For Auld Lang Syne, my Joe, for Auld Lang Syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for Auld Lang Syne.
No, thank you so much. Yeah. Well, Burns, like Wordsworth, another poet, spent a little bit of time thinking about over the course of my career, like Wordsworth in the Prelude, uses his skills as a poet to capture the past in precise, seemingly insignificant details, running over the hillsides, pulling the gowans fine, the wild daisies, paddling in the burn. And those details, focused and amplified through the power of verse, acquire huge emotional force. Burns's reworking of Auld Lang Syne is a masterpiece of romantic lyric poetry. But it's a poem that's inseparable from the music to which it's set. Whether it be the melancholy air of the original song, which we've been listening to for the different versions tonight, or the more jaunty tune of The Miller's Daughter, which was substituted in the Thompson edition, and which is the one that's almost always used today. Now, as I say, later you'll have a chance to sing the whole song together in tribute to Burns, but also in tribute to the rich song traditions of Scotland that Burns loved, that he absorbed, that he preserved, and that he brilliantly reworked. Burns the poet, Burns the songwriter, Burns the rewriter. And these Burnses come together in this unforgettable song. This song that's unforgettable and is about not forgetting, which has deservedly become the iconic song of the Scots nation. So for this and for everything else that he has given us, let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to join me in a toast to the immortal memory of Robert Burns.
Robert Burns.